Hi, everybody. Okay, so um, we are really excited about this bee job panel we have today, especially in lieu of it being World Bee Day tomorrow. So that was a very nice coincidence. So I'm going to start out just by introducing the panelists we have, a little bit from their bio, and then they'll go on and talk a little more in depth about their journey, and then we can open it up for questions. So to start out, we have Melanie Kirby, and she is a Tiwa Apache Caribbean American who was first introduced to apiculture as a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer stationed in South America. She is a researcher, writer, ceramics artist, I guess. She founded Zia Queen Bee's Farm and Field Institute in the Southern Rocky Mountains and serves as an extension educator focusing on the intersectionality of culture, food system, sovereignty, and the arts at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And she actually just got her MS. So congrats, Melanie. And then we are next going to introduce Leif Richardson. He is a conservation biologist with the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation and worked until recently as an environmental consultant. His work focuses on the distribution and diversity of native bees, as well as their value as agricultural pollinators. At Xerces, he is launching a community science project to inventory the bumblebees of California. And as an environmental consultant, his work focused on assessing risk of pesticides to manage and wild pollinators, as well as inventory and monitoring for endangered species. He previously conducted his graduate work on chemical ecology of pollination and worked as an ecologist for the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources. So Lee's research specialty is bumblebee ecology and conservation, and he's a co-author of Bumblebees of North America, an ID guide. So that's super cool. And next, I'll introduce Steve Peterson. He has a BS in entomology from UC Davis and a PhD from University of Wisconsin at Madison. And his PhD topic was in integrated pest management, and he studied as a postdoc at the University of Idaho on alfalfa leaf-cutting bees, Megachile rotundata. So he's had a few different types of jobs, including contract research, leaf-cutting, bee pollination of alfalfa for seed, and teaching at community college. And he currently has his own business where he raises osmia mason bees for research pollination of almonds and blueberries, and he consults with growers on solitary bee pollination. So we're excited to have him. And last but not least, Teresa Pitzinger. She was born and raised outside of Nashville. And at Vanderbilt University, she double majored in biology and anthropology and obtained her MS and PhD in entomology at the University of Georgia. Between undergrad and grad school, she worked for 3 years at Vanderbilt Medical Center as a cytogenetic technician. And with her PhD, she was co-coordinator for 2 sessions organizations for tropical studies and tropical field course in Costa Rica for 3 months each. She was a postdoc at the University of Arkansas Extension Service and the U.S. Forest Service, and at University of Georgia, studying overwintering aspects of boll weevil, rare plant pollinators, and termite foraging behavior. So she taught undergrad and grad students in entomology, zoology, invertebrate zoology, general biology, and she is a assistant professor now. And then she became an assistant professor at University of Arkansas. Her current employment at the USDA ARS Pollinating Insect Research Unit began in 2002, and her current full-time research is with the management and environmental efforts on the solitary cavity nesting blue orchard bees and alfalfa leaf-cutting bees as important pollinators of U.S. crops. So beyond her career, her passion is rugby, and she's played for 20 years and has been coaching. So that's kind of an interesting fun fact. But yeah, we have a lot of really awesome panelists studying a wide diversity of bees. So it should be a really interesting conversation. And now I'll just move on to letting them kind of explain their journey to where they are. And if you start thinking of questions, just populate the chat and we'll move on to those after. So let's start that with Steve. Why don't you go first?
Okay. Thanks, Jess. It's good to be here. So my career path has kind of meandered a bit, but I guess I'll just kind of go through a little bit. Like Jess kind of outlined, um, I guess I would start that, I'm currently, I have my own business, and it's called Foothill Bee Ranch. I'm in Northern California, near Auburn, which is on Highway 80. Anyway, to get where I'm at today, I first started learning about solitary bees as a postdoc at University of Idaho. And it just really opened my eyes to what, the non-honeybees were like, and how they could be used, and um, how well they could pollinate a crop like alfalfa seed, and that there was a lot still to be learned about these bees. So the the possibilities for research were really wide open. After my postdoc, I did a little bit of contract research with a small company in Watsonville, and that kind of work was more ag chemical related, where you're looking at residues on crops and efficacy of crop chemicals. I did that for a couple of years, and really wasn't my cup of tea exactly. So I ended up going back to leaf cutting bees more in a commercial sense, where I partnered up with some folks in Canada and Idaho to create a system where we would bring leaf cutting bees down from Canada, incubate them in California, and then sell them to alfalfa seed growers. And this that was really exciting to kind of set that up. We set up big, huge incubators, and I was taking out millions of bees to the field, and so really got a feel for what it's like to do something on a large kind of commercial scale and work with growers. So that was a lot of fun. What I found out, though, was that the alfalfa seed industry is somewhat cyclical. And a problem with it is that you can store alfalfa seed in a warehouse for years and it's still good. So when they overproduce it for a couple of years, then all of a sudden they stop planting alfalfa seed and they don't need leaf cutting bees anymore. So this happened to us, about 7 years into it, about 2001, 2002. All of a sudden, nobody wanted leaf cutting bees anymore. So I really had to think about what else I could do. And at that point, I started to diversify and looking more seriously at osmia bees, because that bee was known for years to be a good orchard pollinator, especially almonds, cherries, plums, apples, and they exist in California. So I started to work with them on a small scale, taking them out to orchards and seeing how they would work. And at the same time, I began part-time teaching at a community college. And so that was a lot of fun. If there's any questions about what that's like, I can go into that. But and then about 2006, honeybees sort of hit a real crisis with the onset of this colony collapse disorder. And people really started getting interested in osmia bees and alternative pollinators. And so I got kind of recruited by a grower who wanted to start a business raising osmia lignaria bees. And so I did that, worked with him for about 9 years on that, and learned an awful lot about raising these bees, what works, what doesn't work. It eventually, we had to diversify, and we bought an entire honeybee apiary, and we started doing that to make sure our business would survive and have some diversity to it. And that became more and more important in the business, and the osmia bees less and less so. So eventually I decided I wanted to move on, and I decided I could do osmia bees myself. And so I started my own business. I moved up into the foothills where they're easier to raise. And I offer consulting services. I do research. In fact, I've cooperated with Teresa on a couple of projects, and I sell bees to growers as well. So so that's where I'm at now, and I guess that's where I'll end.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Can we hear from Teresa next?
Sure. So it's kind of funny to think that I ended up with bees, because that's never been a career goal of mine. I don't know that I've ever had a career goal. The goal's always been to find the next paycheck, and so you just put one foot in front of the other and it leads you where it leads you. But I think it's more guided than that. And so I didn't know that I was going to go to graduate school. Even I didn't like Vanderbilt. I didn't like actually, it was really snobby. I didn't fit in. And then I found the rugby team and I fit right in. and so, there were some people, from that group that helped me through. And then I just wanted to get done. And then once I did start working with cytogenetics, which, by the way, is like when you get an amniocentesis done, or so it's karyotyping, where you match up chromosomes and look for anomalies. That's what that is. And the people I was working with there, and especially my supervisor there, said, you know what, you're learning this so fast, and all I was doing was working and then going to rugby practice and drinking beer, working. So I had that paycheck and some insurance, but they're like, you need to go back to school. What are you doing? And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. So when I applied for school, it actually kind of had to do with where there'd be a rugby team I could play on. So you see these things go hand in hand. And so I ended up at the University of Georgia. And then I had a terrific mentor there who, it was embarrassing to read a letter of support, for things from him. Can I live up to what he put in that letter? Things like that. But it was, that's, that there's angels that look over you and you don't even know it. So I got a lot of guidance from him. I'm from a really big family. Nobody in my family went to college even. So this is all like a mystery to me, how I get from this place to that place. And then that's the kind of way my life went. It was, by the time I was done with my PhD, there was already someone who'd seen me play Linnaean games, or who knew somebody who I knew, said, hey, I got this boll weevil job in Arkansas. We got lots of money. You want to come and do it? Okay, I don't know boll weevils, but I guess I'll figure it out. And that was a lot of fun. And there was a rugby team in Little Rock. So I got checked all the boxes. Same thing coming, I went to Costa Rica and did all that stuff. That kind of came out of the blue. Went back to Georgia, poking around for a job. And one of my grad students' friends had just become a professor working on termites. And he's like, oh, wow, I'm starting up a whole lab. Come work for me. And so we can get it all set up and get it running, So see, things just happened. I kept looking, I kept working hard. I think that's the comment, that you just keep working hard and just doing the best you can. And then when the time comes, there's another door that will open, and you're hopeful that whoever you worked for last will speak well about you so that you can get the next thing. So, and somewhere in there I got married, and then I ended up coming out to Utah for this job, which is a shock that I've been here like 19 years now. And it has, definitely become my career. But all those little things I did before, the craziness, the rugbiness, the working in extension in Arkansas, all those things really were like the best parts of a resume for the job I have right now. I mean, who knew? But it really all coalesced, and, luck, passion, compassion, and just, continue to work hard and trying to impress. And, it just panned out. So that's kind of how I got from here to there with no plan whatsoever.
Awesome. Always nice to hear other people without a plan. Can we have Leif next?
Yeah. So I will continue the theme of backing into jobs, backing into places that I wasn't sure I wanted to be, and not really having a plan, but it has worked out pretty well. I started college sick of science and thinking I didn't want to be a scientist and was going to study languages or something else. And I took an ornithology class after a couple of years because I liked birds, and that kind of led me into deciding to be a biologist after all. And I was really interested in plants. I think just from a background growing up with folks who took me outside a lot. And so I thought I was going to be a botanist, and I did a plant reproduction field study, like senior thesis kind of thing in college, and there were bees, and it just kind of blew my mind. I really got interested in bees. And so I had a lot of uncertainty about whether I wanted to go to grad school, and if so, for what. So after college, I did a series of field assistant type jobs. I worked on vegetable farms. I did all sorts of other things that were not really related to my career for a paycheck. And eventually decided to go back for a PhD. And I went to the University of Arizona in the lab of Judy Bronstein. This is the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology department. And I actually had a great time there, and it was a good thing for my career, but I changed my mind about the PhD and left with a master's. So I sort of changed course in the second year and finished a 3-year, like a thesis kind of master's. I worked then, I'm from Vermont, more or less. And so I went back there, I got married, I had a child. I got a job working for state government as an ecologist, and I did a lot of that. I worked for about 10 years in the Fish and Wildlife agency or department. So I did a lot of rare plant and animal inventory and monitoring, and helps to manage state lands in all sorts of different ways. I was an ecologist there, but I was tasked also with working on the game species management project. So I ended up learning a lot about how to manage a white-tailed deer population or a moose population. And that initially I thought, I turned my nose up at it and thought, this isn't what I want to do with my job. But it was actually very useful to me to think about, consumable natural resources and how to have a sustainable production of something that we humans are harvesting off the land. So I eventually, after about 10 years of that, I decided I continued to be interested in bees, and I started writing that field guide while I was still a state biologist, and it became clearer and clearer I should probably finish the PhD and do this full time. So I went back to school. I went to Dartmouth. I was in the lab of Becky Irwin. Some of you may have heard of her. And I did a PhD there working on the chemical ecology of interactions between bees and the plants that they feed off of, and also the pathogens of those bees. So in a nutshell, my work showed that some of the naturally occurring plant chemicals that are present in nectar and pollen have a medicinal effect on bee consumers in terms of their gut pathogens. Some of them do not, but anyway, that's another story. So I chose Dartmouth partly because it was close to where I lived, and I had a family, and I couldn't just go anywhere. I couldn't uproot and go just anywhere for a PhD program at that point. I then tried to get a job in academia. I got a postdoc at the University of Vermont with Taylor Ricketts, and spent 2 very enjoyable years doing blueberry work. So it was a crop study. It was looking at the effect of multiple mutualisms on blueberry yield, blueberry reproduction, pollination reproduction, and crop yield. So basically, it was an experiment designed to look at whether the below ground mutualists of the plants, which are mycorrhizal fungi, affect above ground plant traits in ways that affect the bees' behavior on the flowers, and thus the pollination efficacy of the bees. And the short story is yes, the fungi are driving above ground interactions between the other 2 partners, which was interesting. After that, I applied widely for faculty jobs, and I got one offer, but I declined it. I found that I was being pretty choosy about where I wanted to live for similar reasons to the reasons I had for going to grad school nearby. And I ended up sort of casting about, wondering what I was going to do for work at that point. I knew somebody who worked for an environmental consultant, and I just wrote them a letter and suggested that they hire me and start doing more. So they do a lot of ag chem sort of work. So testing the risk of pesticides in terms of their drift profile and that sort of thing. So I just sort of proposed. This isn't very much like me. It's not typically how I behave on the job market, but I just wrote them a letter and said, you should hire me to do this thing. And I was lucky because they had been thinking there is this growing need for bee risk assessment work in the regulated world of EPA and these companies. And so for the last 4 years, I've been working for this company called Stone Environmental, based in Vermont, doing field studies nationwide, lots of non-bee work. So again, studying things like the properties of pesticides with respect to drift and volatility. So setting it up just like a farmer would, making an application of these pesticides and then collecting residues downwind on filter paper and other ways of collecting, analyzing residues, sometimes using plants to catch the residues, basically implementing studies the way that EPA requires that they be done. I designed some new types of methodologies for bumblebee risk assessment work. Currently, EPA only requires that companies study the risk to honeybees, and honeybees are treated as a surrogate for all of the other bees. But EPA is also on the side working towards risk assessment methodologies for mason bees, for bumblebees, and perhaps eventually some other types of bees. I think that in the last 4 years, they put that idea on hold, but we did some work to design studies where you would use a bumblebee model. You'd use Bombus impatiens in a tunnel study in place of the honeybee, or in a colony feeding study, which is where you're dosing a pesticide residue inside the hive, but the bees are free to forage out on the landscape. So I just changed jobs. About a month ago, I started working for the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. So now I'm a conservation biologist, and I'm here in Southern California in Riverside, and I'm running the California Bumblebee Atlas, as you heard. And this is a community science project to use volunteer effort to do passive or non-lethal sampling of bumblebees. So it's basically catching, chilling, identifying, photographing and identifying, and then releasing the bees unharmed. And we are trying to motivate an awful lot of Californians to help us with this. And I'm just excited to be starting this job and getting my feet under me in terms of being here in California. So that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. Maybe we have some Californians here that can help you. So last but not least, we have a video actually from Melanie, kind of showing her journey. So if you want to go ahead and share, or introduce it in any way you want, Melanie, go right ahead.
Sure. Well, great. No, this is great to be a part of this panel. So thank you for including me. And I tend to go on and on and on. So I lucked out and took this little digital storytelling course this last summer when we were all in lockdown, and was able to kind of pull together my journey in 3 minutes, which is a lot easier than me explaining it, because that would probably take me a lot longer. So I'll share this video, and let me see, I'm gonna do share screen. Here we go. Oh, yeah, share sound too. Let me know if you don't hear it, and I'll try to make it larger. Okay. I've traveled many a bumpy road in the darkest of nights, serving as a chauffeur to beings of sweet starlight. I migrate with them, like a shepherd, roaming with my flock of winged midwives, as a fellow follower of the bloom, a self-proclaimed nectar nomad. I was introduced to this artistic science of beekeeping 2 decades ago as a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer collaborating with peasant farmers in South America. The bees captivated my curious mind, and working in an outdoor office made of fresh air, flowers, and freedom enticed my soul. My nomadic journey as an apiculturist has taken me far from where I could ever have imagined, having come from a humble home in Pueblo Indian country in New Mexico. My heritage is a mosaic of cellular memories influenced by my Native American ancestors, who instilled in me a profound reverence for place and purpose, and to pursue acts of community service. So I chose to become a bee farmer, as I wanted to continue to learn from Mother Nature and Father Time. As a farmer, I share beekeepers' voices of concern and need for adaptation and innovation to fulfill our dedication for local to global food production. Sharing their challenges, I became encouraged to return to academia to help quantify their observations and advocate for pollinator conservation. Now, as a researcher, my quest to better understand the relationship between cultures, food systems, and stewardship is at the forefront of my thoughts. Honeybees are like some of us and our ancestors, immigrants to this country. They have adapted and become the backbone of agriculture. There are distinct ecotypes or subspecies of honeybees like races in humans, and these ecotypes carry genetic histories like seas which contain their very existence and memories of creation. For within each one, they have the power to nurture and adapt, and the magnificence to create life, food, and medicine for the world. One of the things I most enjoy about beekeeping is that it bridges cultures and goes beyond borders. It connects us to our origins as fellow beings of light, as a part of this land, not separate from it. This magnificence is alluring and inspires me to find and connect with bees and their keepers around the globe. I invite you all to accompany me on my nectar nomad storytelling journey as I chase the bloom, encounter cultures, and follow the liquid starlight known as honey from flora to flavor to feast. Cool. So hopefully you all can hear that. And yeah, so my start was as a Peace Corps volunteer in the late 90s, kind of dated myself here. I did my undergrad, actually, I did 2 years of marine biology fisheries and was double majoring in ceramics too. I love pottery, so that's kind of my first love as well. But I was doing that at University of Miami and had way too much fun going to a beach school town, and then decided to switch gears. And so then I came back to New Mexico, my home state, and I graduated from St. John's College, which is a small liberal arts school that follows a great books program. So as I describe it to people, I read a lot of old dead people, but it was great because it really taught me, how to learn, right? To sort of self-navigate and become a real advocate for my own learning. Where if, instead of being taught something or at least being lectured to and then just regurgitating it, if I was interested in something, it would motivate me to go and find out. And so I decided to do Peace Corps, but it was funny because my plan after graduating from St. John's, which you end up with an advanced liberal arts degree, was that I was going to do Peace Corps and then I was going to move to San Francisco and be a DJ. That was my life plan. Like I had it all set up in my mind. And then, the Peace Corps changed everything. My mother had actually done the Peace Corps back in the late 60s. And so that's what had inspired me to pursue that. And I had no idea that it was going to change the whole direction of my life. So I knew nothing about bees and beekeeping. I knew nothing even really about farming before doing Peace Corps. And I was stationed in Paraguay in South America for a couple years. And I really had this sort of epiphany while I was there. I'd gone to school already now for 6 years. And then all of a sudden I was learning so much from these peasant farmers who only had a third grade education. And they were extremely intelligent. They knew so much about their landscape, about the seasons, about the stars, about so many things. Material wealth-wise, of course, they were, subsistence farmers, so they didn't have fancy mansions or anything like that. But they knew so much, and I really kind of struggled with, wow, we go to school, we pay to go to school, but like these folks have only gone to third grade, and they know so much more than I do, and I've gone to like higher education for 6 years. And so I decided then and there that I was really going to try and just work in the field for a bit and see, I wanted to do grad school, but I figured, I'll wait a few years. And yeah, the few turned into 20. So I didn't mean to put it off for so long. But what ended up happening was after I worked in Hawaii or I worked in Paraguay for a couple of years, and one of my really good friends was from Hawaii. And so I ended up going out there and then working for a couple commercial queen rearing operations, which again, I had no idea that there was even a huge industry and how many facets to the beekeeping world there were. And so, I went down that rabbit hole in 1999 and I still haven't surfaced yet. So I'm still in that labyrinth. But after working for several different commercial ops for about 8 years, I finally decided, okay, I think I'm ready to start my own little farm. And so in 2005, with my farm partner, he's actually from Michigan, we started Zia Queen Bees, which is based here in the Southern Rockies at about 8,000 foot elevation. So we have a pretty short growing season. And of course, honeybees are the poster child, but also they've been extremely exploited. And so, coupling that with my own indigenous worldview and just the modern contemporary world we live in, they really helped to introduce me to the broader world of pollinators and diversified pollinators. And so I'm a big advocate for biodiversity. And I have to be honest in that, when I got started with beekeeping, which was the late 90s, this was, people would hear me say, oh, I'm a beekeeper. They would hear bookkeeper and the conversation would go on. And it was great. But then 2006 hit, colony collapse disorder hits the news. And then people would say, oh, you're a beekeeper. Oh, what's going on with the bees? And for those who don't know, you're into insects, you probably already know. Insect people tend to be, a little on the quieter, shy side. And so all of a sudden being in the spotlight and being asked all these questions like, what's going on with the bees? Is it cell phones? Is it pesticides? Is it this? It was pretty daunting, but I realized it was an opportunity to sort of embrace that platform in terms of being able to educate, right? And so I started doing a lot more outreach events through my farm, and I was lucky to get a couple of grants through the New Mexico Department of Ag and also through Western Sustainable Ag Research Education, Western SARE, to look at different breeding projects. And so I describe myself as a seed saver, but using the bees as the seeds. And so really looking to find locally adapted strains that then I can collaborate with other beekeepers and farmers to then rear and propagate and share with beekeepers in the region. So it's, one word that was given to me years ago by Dr. Marla Spivak, who's one of my longtime sheroes, when I had asked her, what do you recommend for somebody like myself who's getting into this industry? And this was probably a good 16 or so years ago that I asked her this, because I've been doing this now for 24 years. And she said, perseverance. And that was it. Just one word, perseverance. And so that's one of the main takeaways that has always stayed with me, but something that I always, say forward to folks is that if you're really into it, the stars will eventually align, And so it was after being in the field for about 13 years and having 2 kids and my back really starting to grumble that I was like, I think I'm ready to go back to school. And part of that was because I love the industry so much and I want to be able to support it, but I knew that I couldn't do it to the same extent that I had been. And so, and again, working with these farmers who know so much, but yet they don't have the degrees, I didn't really understand why their observations were immediately dismissed. And so I happened to be at a bee conference here in Albuquerque, actually, and Dr. Steve Shepard, who's my advisor, was there. And I was talking to him about how, my breeding program, we've been selecting for close to 20 years, blah, blah, blah. And he just looked at me and he went from antagonist to protagonist. But as the antagonist, he said, well, that's great now, but that's a case study, and that's irrelevant science. And of course, my mouth dropped because I thought, well, you just told me my life's work means nothing, like how dare you? But it also really lit a fire under me, and it made me realize, I see what it is. We don't speak the same language. He's in academia and I'm a farmer. And so maybe, I need to learn this language better so that I can help to serve as a translator. And so I mentioned to him that I was interested in going back to school. And a few months later, he actually offered me a graduate assistantship. And so he turned into the protagonist. and gave me that opportunity, which I just did my master's final exam last week and passed. So now I actually have my master's degree, which is really awesome. And for those who don't know, Washington State University, that's where he's based, has a world-renowned bee lab, and they do a lot of work with actually bringing in honeybee germplasm. They're not actually allowed to bring in live bees. They can bring in semen, and then they can actually do instrumental insemination back across it to get to about 97% of the original stock line. And the efforts to that end are so that they can bring some of these genetics here to the States, which have already developed, natural resistance to various pests and pathogens, and then be able to outcross them and share them with producers. So I'm I want to say sort of a fan of not only applied research, but, taking into account history and old world scenarios and complementing them with modern Western science. So kind of walking that, in two worlds, but finding where they're complementary and bringing them together. And so now more currently, I was actually a 2019-2020 Fulbright National Geographic Fellow, and I was stationed in Spain. And then the pandemic hit. I was doing bee breeding research there, evaluating mating behavior with RFID, radio frequency identification. But the pandemic hit, so that pulled the rug out from underneath me and came back to my home state. And so now I'm actually working for Institute of American Indian Arts, which is an art school. However, they have a very well-developed land grant program. So I do ag extension here, and we have food. I'm looking right out the window at our farm. We have a small orchard. We have traditional growing methods, but we also do modern techniques like drip irrigation. We have a 1,200 square foot greenhouse. We have a whole tree nursery program. And we're starting our bee program this year. So we have a lot of nest blocks out. We're going to be doing some habitat restoration projects as well. Yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Wow. Thank you, everyone. We have such a wide diversity of backgrounds and perspectives to draw from. So yeah, please start populating the chat with your questions. But while we're waiting, or while you're thinking of your questions, I guess it would be nice to just kind of get an idea of what your day-to-day looks like for people that might want to do the type of job you're doing. So if you could kind of depict a day in the life of your job, that would be awesome. So if we could start with Steve, do you want to go?
Yeah, all right. That's an interesting question, because one of the things I like about my job is that it's constantly changing, and it basically just follows the bee life cycle throughout the year. So if we look at right now, mid-May, this is the time where I'm out bringing back my nests from the field. So the way I raise blue orchard bees is I find private property owners in various places in the Sierra foothills, and I put empty nests and at first, and then once I get some bees from a location, I'll return them to that spot and try to build them up. So at this point, the bees are finished nesting. I've got larvae growing in the nests. And so I just make trips, picking up nests and bringing them back to my my location here in Forest Hill. I've got a workshop where I store the nests over the summer, kind of keep the temperatures moderate. That's one nice thing about being up in the foothills. It's not quite as hot as the valley. And so I don't really need to air condition them like I would need to if I were in the valley, for example. So at this time of year, I'm doing lots of driving. And I would say, July and August are probably my slowest months, which is kind of nice. I do other things at that time of year, but then starting up in the fall, that's the time when I start cleaning out those nests. But by that point, the bees are adults, and so I spend a lot of time cleaning them, sterilizing the nest, putting them back together, getting them ready for the next season. And then January, February, I'm putting the nest back out in the field, and then I'm doing my almond work starting in February when almonds bloom in California. And so at that point, I'm visiting with growers, train them how to use the mason bees, because it's a little bit of a different system that with the solitary bees, we actually sell the bees to the growers, so they become their bees, but they need to be trained on how to manage them, and so I provide that service for them, and then kind of the cycle starts all over again. So, well, I'll say that last summer I worked through those summer months working on grant proposals, and I was able to put one together on blueberries and Osmia ribiflora. I might want to talk to Leif about his blueberry experience. That sounded really interesting. So I was successful in getting a grant, and that's through the Small Business Innovation Research Program, which is a great program for small businesses. I've had a few of those over the years, and anyhow, so that's another thing, that is part of my seasonal cycle that I work on over the summer. So that's probably a little more than you wanted, but there you go.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. How about Teresa?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a difference between COVID year and all other years. But so I've, like you, been doing a lot of this, my neck hurts and I don't walk enough and gain weight. So I do a lot of computer stuff. And but for my job in agricultural research service, as at my level, so as a research entomologist, I have a full-time technician, a postdoc, and then seasonal employees, and can also mentor graduate students for their research, although I can't be named their major advisor. I basically serve as that, but I can't be named it. So so I have all those things going all at once all the time. So, I'll answer emails in the morning, answer technical questions remotely from my technician who's at the lab these days, and has been most of the COVID years. But even if I were sitting at my desk in the mornings, I like to come in before everybody else and kind of get those emails thought through and kind of plan the day, and then wait for all the unexpected things to start happening, so that plan goes thrown out the window. But I would say we never have like an off season. We mostly have a next season. So like Steve, we've been doing Blue Orchard bee stuffs, but because we have grants or projects with him or other people, we may either I will go with, or postdocs will go out to California in some years, and then recently in Washington to work in orchards with the Blue Orchard bees. And then we come back to Utah and we do the same thing. We do more Blue Orchard bee stuff with the later orchard bloom that's here. And some of that is more, it's some orchard work, but mostly it's putting bees in orchards to bring them back into the lab. So recently we've been working on pesticide testing and like Leif, trying to figure out with, for and with EPA and others, how do you test a solitary bee on poison provision, basically, not what happens to, direct feeding, but if a larva fed over time on a provision mass, which is collected in a day, and it's the only food that larva gets its whole life, how do you do that? And so graduate students have been working on those kinds of projects, and a lot of trial and error. We might also do Y2 bioassays this time of year on either bees or their parasites to see, back with the chemical ecology kind of things I did as a graduate student on paper wasp to understand kin recognition. I've taken those tools from what I learned in my professor's chemistry lab. He was a chemist, like how to think about odors and cues and attraction, and that a 4-day-old adult Hymenoptera works better than a just emerged adult Hymenoptera. And that went from my days with paper wasps to exactly what we needed for testing bees for, how do they learn and how do they react to cues? And then also, all right, so that would be like stuff we might do with Blue Orchard bees. And then at the same time, we're prepping things for leaf cutting bees because we'll have to start incubating them. So the blue orchard bees will hatch in just a few days because they're overwintered adults. The leaf cutting bees are overwintered pre-pupae that take 3 weeks to emerge. But if we want to say do a feeding of the bees right after they emerge for a week and compare them to bees that just emerge, well, we have to start those a week ahead of the other ones because you got to feed them a week, but you want to put them all in a field cage at the same time. So you have the same environmental conditions to ask, what is the reproductive output from bees that were treated differently or, fed or whatever it is we're doing to them this year. We've had cage studies every year for all years that I've been here, I think. Maybe not the very first year when I arrived in July, but we set up 20 to 30 field cages over a field of alfalfa, and we ask whatever the pertinent question is that year. It might be 3 different questions with different graduate students doing different things or guests doing different things. So that will consume the whole summer, is kind of back and forth between the office, the lab. I set up cages, I dig dirt. I, just like everybody else, that's my model. If it's something that I wouldn't do, then I'm never going to ask someone else to do it. But I would like to be there with you doing it, at least for a while. I just can't do it all the time, but it's really is what I enjoy the most. So I wish I could do it all the time. And then in the fall, the day turns into prepping for meetings and summing up reports and annual reports for the agency, plus reports for any grants that you have. Attending all kinds of meetings from fall into winter. And so it kind of never stops except for maybe Christmas break if you can. And then when do you write your papers between all of that? So yeah, I think that's, for most people in academia, it's the same way, except I never teach. So when academia are off during this school year, I'm trying to do writing and reporting and coordinating. And then when people are off during the summer, if like a faculty member who doesn't have a big research program, they might have a little time off. That's when I get even super busy, so I have less time for things like that. Maybe that's not
sounds like a lot. Very dynamic though, and fun sounding. So I guess next, can we have Leif? And can I also piggyback this question that's specifically for you in the chat? The question is, did you do any community science work before your current position? Christine would love to be involved in both community science outreach and research. So do you have any advice for how to get involved?
Let me answer that question first. Yes, I do have some experience with community science, sometimes referred to as citizen science. I worked on what was one of the first bumblebee atlas projects in the US, which was in Vermont, 2012 through 2014. We did a community science project where we found volunteers, we trained them. We sent them out to do this. In that case, it was lethal surveys, and then they brought their specimens to us, and I did the ID and lots of the training and interfacing with volunteers, but not so much of the project management. I wasn't in charge of the budgets or really, I wasn't really in charge of the volunteers. I had some time with them, but I also, over the last 5 years, I've worked on the main bumblebee atlas in a similar capacity. So I've been sort of a science or taxonomist to them. So I do the identification of specimens that the community science volunteers bring into us. So they go out and they make, some of them are just doing photo observations because they don't want to kill bees. Others are collecting bees according to a particular protocol that we have, and then submitting those bees to the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, and then I get the bees from them, do the identification. So I've had experience with the twists and turns that we can get into with community science. I've worked, some of the folks that I've worked with in those jobs, this is what they do. So in the first experience, the Vermont experience, the lead was a nonprofit called the Vermont Center for Eco Studies, and they'd been doing breeding bird atlases and Christmas bird counts, and they had done a butterfly atlas. They do something called mountain bird, where they send volunteers up to the top of mountains to do birding observations annually, so we can track changes in these alpine and subalpine bird species in New England. So they already had the model, and they actually had a lot of the workforce. They had trained people for other purposes, and so we sort of, some of those we adopted them right into the Bumblebee Atlas. So I think that experience probably helped me get into this current position. I don't think it's essential, but I certainly am glad that I've done those things. And I would encourage you, Christine, to think about opportunities like this. Maybe just starting as a volunteer. I mean, I at various points in my career, to find the job I wanted, I just started volunteering. I had some other job doing something to pay the bills, but then I volunteered at the Nature Conservancy or in an herbarium at a university, so that I met people and was contributing. And eventually I was hearing about some jobs that were coming along. And so I think it's a great idea if you participate in those programs. For example, if you are in California and you want to work on the California Bumblebee Atlas, we would be happy to have you. And I think in addition to just bringing in data points for a project, these are volunteer efforts fundamentally. So there's so much work that you could opt in on if you wanted to, that gets you closer to the folks who are running the projects. So that's what I would do. This is a hot time for community science. I think that there's just a proliferation of this model, and it's really, I think it's a wonderful way to do science, to do conservation and to monitor species status. So you can find lots of different, taxa to study if you're interested. So we'll ask another question in the chat if I didn't cover this one, but I'll move on to what my typical days look like. And maybe I'll just blend a little bit, since I'm brand new to this current job, with what I was last doing, because it's analogous. And I liked that Teresa pointed out that there's a lot of sitting behind a computer if you're going to be working in this area. There's no two ways about it. And that is a substantial portion of what I do, right? Whether it's writing or it's emails or it's Zoom or it's, that is a big part of my various jobs. I am a field biologist by choice and training and so on. So I usually do a lot of field work each summer. Last summer, this time of year, I was in Vermont setting up this bumblebee study where we had 10 different organic farm locations where we were renting hay fields, and we were placing bumblebee colonies in those fields in an apiary, and each of the hives in the apiary was getting a different pesticide dose. And so let's see, I had 60 hives to take care of, 10 different field sites, field crew. So and we did a lot of our work at night because the bumblebees are just easier everybody's in the hive when you arrive, and you can close them all in, and you're less likely to get stung by a returning forager. It's just easier to work under headlamp than to try to do this during the day. So last summer, this time in May, I was staying up late, tending bees, doing lots of sort of cleaning of things and making sugar solutions, and dosing them with the right insecticide treatment for this experiment. This year, I am doing lots of planning right now to get this project off the ground. So I'm reaching out to potential volunteers. I'm working hard to find organizations who have members or interested parties or stakeholders who might be interested in our project. We're trying to build a diverse volunteer base that reflects the people of California. So thinking hard about the large number of people and the great diversity of people in the state, and where we can find interested individuals to work on this project. So it's lots of meetings and emails and phone calls right now, but soon I'll be in the field a lot. So this will be a mix of training our participants, actually training them by remotely by Zoom at first. This is a holdover from, this is because of the pandemic, rather than doing these in-person trainings, which we would have done before last year. But we are potentially going to do some in-person trainings in the field for vaccinated folks outdoors. And later in the summer, I will be doing lots of the actual inventory work myself. So I'll be traveling to Northern California. I'll be going to the Sierra Nevadas, the coastal ranges, and my usual MO is to camp. And I spend a couple of days doing inventories in an area. I might go home for a few days, then go out again. So it's a lot of travel. It's a lot of a mix of, motel rooms, campsites, field station accommodations. It's great. It's very interactive. There are usually colleagues involved. Everybody's got a net in their hand, and it's there's this sort of energy about the discovery of it, because you never know what you're going to find. And a number of our species of bumblebees are rare or declining, and so people get pretty excited when we find those rarities and can sort of can document that they occurred on the landscape at that time and place, but also people can have firsthand experience with that organism that is rarely seen. So yeah, and then I guess in the off season, I do lots of writing of papers and analysis of data. I do lots of collaboration with other scientists, and I will probably spend a lot of time in the off season next year. So maybe from October to December or something, planning for the next field season and trying to attract more volunteers to this project, doing some traveling to meet people and give presentations. And I will be doing lots of data entry and bee identification. Typically for me, bee identification means looking at specimens with a microscope or a hand lens. But for this project, this is catch and release and photo only. So we have a website, community science data platform called Bumblebee Watch. And so I'll be doing the identifications of those photos that are submitted by volunteers. Yeah, so it's a lot. It's a bit of everything. It's as much being outdoors as I can manage. And yeah, that's about it.
Awesome. Sounds like you have a really fun season ahead. Can we have Melanie, and then we'll move on to the chat questions. But yeah, let's get an idea of what you do every day.
Sure. So yeah, it's a wild ride. It changes very quickly between daylight to nighttime work, but there's never a dull moment. And kind of building off of what Leaf was saying, there's two really, I want to talk about these sort of two main points, which is collaborations are key. You talked about collaborations, and I really see that as the future of science in general. I was in two other meetings this morning, especially talking about decolonizing science, and looking at, one was with Nat Geo, and then the other one was actually with water and working with tribal communities here in New Mexico and with New Mexico State University. And they were really talking about how, within conservation efforts, how do we get that buy-in, right? So Leaf was talking about, you have this huge demographics, this diverse demographics in California. And how do you get these different populations to participate? And I think a lot of it comes down when it comes to conservation, and just in regards to what I do as a breeder, bee breeder here in New Mexico, is developing those relationships. So I'm a landless farmer, and not so much by choice, but by circumstance. I'd love to own land here in my own ancestral lands, but if I want water rights, it's extremely expensive. And so I just can't afford it. So I rely on what the community is growing or not growing. It's really forced me to become very creative, or I guess I should say inspired me, not so much forced me. But in order to be able to have bees and to test them in different climatic zones and to share them with people, I have to be able to create those relationships, and then they share their space. And so collaborations are really key. So for me, as my bee breeding hat on, usually I'll start with sort of the quote unquote downtime, which would be maybe 2 weeks between Christmas and New Year's, and then the rest of the time is really busy. But I spend the colder season doing a lot of research and talking with folks, reading, writing, creating my plans for what I want to do or which sites I want to do. I have one particular site out here in New Mexico that's pretty isolated that I've been doing some research on for the past 10 years. And then usually comes spring. So my farm partner and I are migratory. He's actually from Michigan. And so when I met him working for a beekeeper in Florida, he was moving his bees between Florida and Michigan. And then when we teamed up, we did the same, and then did it between Florida and New Mexico, and then Michigan, New Mexico, and then now more so New Mexico, California. So we've been going out to California now since 2010, mostly taking breeders to just share breeding stock. And so it wasn't actually until 2016 that I finally decided, okay, I'll get in on this pollination game, because I was a little bit nervous to put my bees in almonds, which I kind of consider to be ground zero, depending on where you're at. But we were going out there anyways. And so, it made sense to kind of help pay for the trip. And so, as Teresa was saying earlier, like just following that next paycheck also really encourages a lot of creativity. So that's, once I get to my spring, it's a lot about just getting the spring season going, and it's all a race against the clock. Like, we're definitely on the bee schedule. As Steve was saying too, we're on the bees calendar, not so much our own. And then, it's a mad dash. Like, just this past weekend, we had bee pickup. And so I was driving some packages down to Albuquerque and to Santa Fe, and I have another pickup this weekend. And then I finally hit the summer, which is what I call my summer stride. And that's actually my favorite time, because then I'm just up in the mountains doing my bee breeding rounds and working on various other projects. I've really gotten more involved too with trying to at least integrate in a little bit more art with the sciences. And so I do a lot of what I call ag art sci projects with people. I just did an installation in Taos, and which was actually the project that took several years. To be honest, it took a decade to pull it off, but part of that was just taking a break to have my kids. But I took some glass heads that were hollow and stuck them in a beehive super. And then the bees built comb in them. And then those became centerpieces that I put on turntables and then had them rotating, and just bringing awareness to pollinators and pollinator conservation. So using the bees as the poster children that they can be to just bring awareness to folks. So I try and be really creative and diversified in my approaches and in what I do. I do a lot of writing too. So that's, once I get over, summer's my spring breeding time, or my summer breeding time, and then fall will be harvest time. And then I start doing a few, holiday sales. With the pandemic this past year, it pushed everything online, which was a really great feat for us as a 2-person operation, because normally I'd be at a fair or something like that. I can't do farmers markets just because I've got queen bees, that are going to be emerging, or nukes to make, or just nucleus hives, or, bees that I have to move. And so it's easier for me to just do specialty events that are just like a 1 or 2 day thing, and then, not have to worry about it till the next year. And then now with the Institute of American Indian Arts, we're a small little crew here. There's myself, I'm an extension educator, and then we have a program associate. We also have a gardener, and then we have our seasonal crew, which during the school year is actually student work study folks, and then during the summers they'll be full time. And so we have various projects that we're doing in terms of whether it's medicinal herbs or corn trials, or even beans and squash, the Three Sisters. We also do some collaborative works with area farms and different tribal communities. There's over 19 sovereign nations here in New Mexico, for those who aren't familiar. And so we serve as a liaison, but also a conduit for information. And my hope is to really do that, not so much decolonize science, because I'm of mixed descent myself, but to really sort of indigenize it in a sense, meaning that to bring more awareness to these various knowledge systems, which are just as valid, and to broaden that narrative so that there's space for all of us to share our observations and to learn from them. So kind of in a nutshell, I do a little bit of everything, but it is a lot of sitting at the computer and reading and writing and responding and all of that.
Awesome. Amazing. Like it's so interesting how you're able to combine the arts and culture and all these various things with bees. So always great to hear. So let's move on to some chat questions, and we don't have to be like taking turns for these. Whenever people want to respond, feel free. So I'll start with this question from Crystal, which is, what non-bee research skills have helped you in your job or career?
I can answer that, at least from my perspective. For me, I think a lot of it had to do, I mean, some of the best skills I ever learned was as a Peace Corps volunteer, just being immersed in a different culture and having to build trust. Learning a new language, especially if you want to do research abroad or work with collaborators or from different labs that are in different countries. You know, one of the nice things about bees for me is that they've taken me around the world. I mean, I've been able to visit, I don't know how many different countries and work on projects with so many different people. And I found that knowing Spanish, or at least the Latin root, I know a little bit of French, I can understand Italian and Portuguese. That really has helped a lot. It's just being able to communicate and to understand people. And so I think learning how to adapt to an area that you're not familiar with can be really helpful. And for me, that's just through traveling. I really, hopefully after the pandemic, we'll all be able to travel a lot more again.
Yeah, I'll add to that, the ability to be flexible is really key. And you learn that through your whole life if you're, up for it. And flexibility, not only in the organism of choice, but also what you do with the organisms. But I think what's a theme that I've heard from all of us is that you have to be able to listen to the customer and understand the customer and value that customer, because they do have a lot to share back to you. They know things you absolutely have no clue what it's like to be them at using the bees for crop pollination in a way that impacts their bottom line, which is growing a crop. And that's in the presence of all kinds of stressors on the bees. And so you have to understand where they're coming from and work together to find solutions. And so I think, I'm from a big family. I also have been out on my own a lot. And so, you have to be able to engage with a lot of people and share space and be humble, but then also be confident enough to, when you've decided this is what I should do, that you believe in yourself enough to go out and do it. And those are life skills beyond anything academia can give you, I think.
I can add, let's see, I think that some of the core intellectual skills that have come to me through life are really important to doing this job well. So being a good writer, working hard on learning to write is really useful to anybody who's interested in these things broadly, right? I think that science, the kind of science that we do these days, is very collaborative, and I noticed that that being able to work in groups and to share the responsibilities and privileges of being in a group with others is not, it doesn't come naturally to everybody, and it's something we all have to work on. And I would say that those are really important experiences or skills to build for working on this particular, on bees and in a scientific sort of framework. I would also say that for me personally, generally, like life experiences and doing things not related to science and bees particularly has really enriched my work. So similar to Melanie, traveling and learning another language has been really useful in all sorts of ways. Similar to what Teresa has said, thinking about agriculture from the perspective of growers and other stakeholders who I don't normally identify with, for example, the producers of pesticides, has been valuable to me in thinking about things from the perspective of the bees. So I would encourage you to branch out and think about, get out of your comfort zone, think about things related to bees, but that are separate from them, like agriculture, like botany. There are lots of other domains of knowledge that are super valuable to you as a bee scientist, that sort of they become a context for the specific bee stuff that you may find yourself choosing to focus on in your career.
Yeah, I would totally agree with all of those things. When you work with bees, you are going to be working with landowners and growers. You have to be able to communicate well with them. And for a lot of scientists, myself included, we tend to be a little bit introverted. So you kind of have to push yourself a little bit to communicate well with folks, go to their meetings, talk to them. So that's really important. And I liked what Leaf said about writing well. That has really served me well for grant writing. Yeah, I'll keep working on those writing skills. Yeah, everything that they said was, I'd agree with that.
Awesome. Oh, okay, cool. Sorry, I thought I froze. Great advice. So for Olivia's question about traveling, I think maybe we've already got a sense of all the traveling that happens, but feel free to ask again, Olivia, if you don't feel like you got that answered. And I'll go to your other question so that you can get this one. So she asks, with the solitary bee and bumblebees, I know monitoring and identification can be difficult, and there's a lack of information for many species about their populations. Have you found it difficult to work in conservation with these bees, given that in many cases there's little solid evidence of population and range declines because there's so little monitoring?
I could speak about this one. Yes, I have found it challenging. I'm kind of right in the middle of this with bumblebees, and not so much with other bees, other native bees, although I've done some work on them too. Yes, we find that there is a lack of historical or baseline data that was collected in some sort of rigorous fashion that we can go back to those field sites and collect again and compare the past to the present. The best available data for the historic situation has been museum specimen records. And so, as you no doubt know, in the last decade or 15 years, there's been a lot of funding and interest in and effort to digitize museum research collections, like academic and other sorts of research collections. And so aggregating all that bee information from dead bees on pins and their little labels gives you a sense of what happened in the past, but it's a fairly weak, it's not a great baseline because each insect was collected by someone different for different reasons, and so we can't really repeat what was done in the past. We don't really know what survey effort looked like. We don't know if their method involved collecting the first insect they saw or going for only those rarities that they did not yet have in their collection, and or whether they were doing a particular study of that insect or the plant that insect is found on. So one of the ways to address this is to do the baseline work now, and we'll be able to compare to this in the future. So that's one of the motivating ideas about doing these atlases for bumblebees and also for all native bees that we see happening now in many different states and provinces in North America. We have a specific protocol that people will use. We can quantify survey effort. We know how much area was surveyed over how much time by how many people. And in the future, we can go back to those same sites and do it again. And we can monitor change over time. I would say it's a challenge for lots of different conservation biologists working on vertebrates and plants and other things, but it's probably more severe of an issue for invertebrates, since we tend to not pay attention to invertebrates as much as we do other things. So that's what I think about that question.
Yeah, can I add to that? Because I know that there's a big project right now to monitor bees, to figure out like what bees are currently exist across our nation. And the conference or the workshop that Steve and I were both at, I don't think you were there, Lee, for the global climate change stuff. You weren't there.
No, I wasn't there.
Okay. Yeah, that was yesterday. We were talking about, this is one of the shortfalls of the knowledge gaps, is that we don't know what's going to happen with climate change if we don't know the effects of climate change if we don't know who's there in the first place. But I just wanted to add, for those of you who may be soon to look for jobs, etc., there is a brand new bee lab that has just started basically in Stoneville, Mississippi. And the scientist who's there that is the kind of the taxonomist type person. She's just done some kind of first ever studies of what's the diversity of bees down in the southeast around cotton country in the Delta. And so, I mean, it's not done today. You know, they just barely got something done because there were species lists for states nearby, but nothing exactly in Mississippi. So they're starting from scratch with this brand new bee lab down there. And it's in the middle of a lot of agriculture. But even for the survey they did, it sort of matched the species list, and they haven't even added a few, but that includes a couple invasive species. But anyway, they probably will be looking soon for graduate students, postdocs, technicians. I mean, it's just not getting started. So if usajobs.gov is something you can sign up for to get alerts from, and you could maybe, you know, if they have some openings coming soon, RB Lab, you know, every now and then, it's not many positions, we're a small group, but you never know when they're going to come about. But, you know, if you have your, you know, your information in there, you'll get pinged when anything comes up that meets your criteria. But that's going to be a real interesting area that's going to have all the information, all the different types of things you do with bees and think about with honeybees and other bees. They're going to be wide open for ideas for what they're even going to do in the next 5 years. They don't even have like a 5-year plan yet. They're developing it right now. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens with that.
Yeah, that is super exciting. Was there any other input there, or should I move on to the next question from Melanie? Okay. So yeah, I kind of feel like that's a good segue into merging these two questions from Jorge and Ben, which is, how does one seek out bee-related careers? And also, like, how do you balance searching for new job opportunities when you, like with the current position you had? Like, it sounds like you had a lot of pivot points, all of you guys. So yeah, kind of like, how do you navigate that transition into something new?
Okay,
Well,
I'll jump in.
Oh,
Go ahead, Melanie. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Teresa. You go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, a lot of these positions have a timeline. So it's a 2-year position. So you better be looking for the next thing. But the other thing you have to do simultaneously, and well, before you finish graduate school, if that's where you are right now, is get your damn papers written. You won't have time. You think you will not have time in that next job to get your papers done. I have students now that I just want to wring their necks because they're not getting their papers written, but those papers are going to be your currency for getting the next job. So you've got to buckle down and get those pieces of evidence to sit in your resume. And they're not there if they're, you know, in the works. No one's going to believe you that you're really going to get it done. So that would be, you know, you just, and hopefully you would have a current employer who knows that you have to seek the next job and they have your best interest at heart when they see that you need their help, their timely letters of recommendation and things like that. Remember to, you know, for me, I always remember, pay it forward. Think of all the great things that people did for you, pay it forward to your people and those around you. Don't be selfish and want to keep them with you.
Yeah, I totally echo Teresa because I was one of those students that was like, oh, I'll get to it. I'll do it. And of course, you know, life events happen. Like I have reasons for why my timeline got bumped. You know, the pandemic was definitely a real and big one for everybody. But yeah, you think you have time and then you realize you don't have time. And so I would encourage folks to do that, especially while you're, you know, if you're in grad school and you're on an assistantship, like they're paying you to get it done. So try and get it done during that time frame. I think for me, because I really took a rather, I would say, sort of non-circuitous path to do now what I'm doing. I was always just really interested in where can I learn more, you know, and like once I did Peace Corps and I met, you know, one of my closest friends was from Hawaii and I went to work actually at her mom's gardenia farm. And then I saw that there's bee farms here. You know, I just happened to be in line at the DMV standing behind somebody who was wearing a shirt for Kona Queen. And I was like, my friend's like, oh, introduce yourself. And of course I was really shy and but I tapped him on the shoulder and was like, I'm a beekeeper too, you know? And the next thing you know, he's like, oh, my boss is always looking for people who have experience. Of course, I said, well, my experience is really rustic, like machetes and wild swarm catching in the bush, like not factory farming, industrial USA beekeeping. But it didn't matter, just the fact that I was willing to work with stinging insects was enough for that employer to then offer me a position. And and then I got the chance to go back as a trainer for US Peace Corps. Like anytime I've ever been involved with an organization, I try and keep in communication with them. I was able to do a couple volunteer stints as a USAID farmer to farmer exchange program where you don't get paid for your time, but they pay for all your costs. So I was able to go to Jamaica twice with that. Went to Nicaragua, I went to Morocco. There's all sorts of places and opportunities. It's a matter of, just finding those organizations. And again, like Teresa said, USA Jobs, a lot of that is posted up on there if you're looking at government funded positions that may be available. And then more recently, once I got back from the pandemic, I got back from Spain, I was actually holding out for this ag extension job up in northern New Mexico that I was really hoping would open up, and it wasn't. And so for entomology, I think, especially for me now, one of the reasons I decided to do master's instead of going straight into PhD, even though I'm an older non-traditional student, was because I'm realizing more and more that interdisciplinary skills are super important. And I think that when you can market yourself as a diversified, skilled, professional, you're going to have a lot more opportunities. And I think with my advisor, I was one of his most challenging students because since I was older and I'd been in the industry a little bit already, I talked back. I wasn't just like, okay, yes, sir, I'll get it done. I was like, well, why do we do it this way? And why that? But I shared with him one time, he had a couple postdocs that had been there for a long time. And, I shared with him, I said, do you know why they're still here? I was like, it's because there aren't any jobs. I said, folks like yourself got your claws in the 70s and you haven't let go. And so these jobs are not available for how many people are getting cranked out now with masters and PhDs. And so if you're holding out for that one dream job, even for me here in New Mexico, holding out for this one ag extension job that I was just waiting and waiting, it didn't manifest, And so I just started looking around, and lo and behold, I ended up finding something not too far away, still in my home state. It's about an hour from my farm, but it's actually more of my dream job than I could have ever imagined. And so I'm so glad that I didn't just, stay in one spot saying, I'm only going to look here and at this particular institution. I'm going to look around. And I have kids too, so it does make it harder to move. I think having family support or having, that's some sort of community base that can support you if you're going to be doing different things. Like even when I went abroad for my research fellowship, I made arrangements with my mother and, my kid's dad, who's my farm partner, kids came out twice and all this stuff. But there were times where I had to be away from my family. And, I explained to them that this was for us. This was for our family in general to invest in our future together as a family. And there's some hard times, it's hard to be away, especially when you're camping by yourself, which can be a lot of fun. But, when you have to change the tire by yourself, it's not so much fun. But I think just look around. Especially if you're interested in doing private sector, there's a lot of different organizations and consulting firms, that are starting to pop up here and there, especially as we look to do more conservation.
Yeah, those are all great things that others have said. And I'll just add that for me, as someone who's naturally kind of retiring or introverted, I found it a little bit difficult at times in my career to reach out to strangers and say, this is what I do, and I think you could help me, or I have questions for you about this or that. But it's really important to make those social connections. And I guess as an example, when I was done with my master's and I was working as a state ecologist, bees were not part of my job description, but they were just sort of my side interest. And I decided to just on the side keep collecting bumblebees, but actually learn to identify them. And so soon I had a big collection of bees, but I was stuck in certain places. And so I just found the right people to ask questions of and began to pester the experts. And that led to some really fruitful interactions and then eventually collaborations where, they were interested in my collections. So I shared those, and then they had something to teach me. And eventually led to an idea that we should write a book together. And so that was because I came out of my shell a bit, and also like I couldn't not ask. I really needed to know what does this be, or is this that rare one that everyone's looking for? And so I would encourage you to seek out those contacts with people, and don't be afraid of senior folks who can be scary to approach when you're at a meeting and you're a grad student or something. It's if your advisor tells you, you really need to talk to people at these meetings and like make connections and ask the question, are you hiring postdocs in the next 2 years? Those are questions I found really hard to ask, which that's part of the hustle. You have to be willing to make new friends and not be afraid to feel like somebody didn't pay you enough respect because you're junior to them or something like that. You gotta do it anyway. And I will just echo something that Melanie said, that the job market generally is really saturated for people for jobs where you need a degree above your college degree, right? There are many more talented people getting masters and PhDs in this field than there are jobs. And so you're going to need to be flexible about your expectations and what you need to do to support yourself and be happy. And so considering things that are outside of what you think you want to do. For example, for me, consulting in the ag chem industry was not what I got my training to do, but it turned out to be very useful to me. I eventually left it in part because I have some problems with some ethical issues with working on some of the projects that I was asked to work on. But it was enormously useful for me to work with pesticides, and from that perspective, and try to figure out like what are the places where we break down a communication between these different camps and stuff. So think about careers that are outside of what you thought you were getting trained to do, and be flexible and open-minded about where you're going to find the jobs that you're interested in.
Yeah, and I would say that I totally agree with what everybody said. I'll just tell one little story about how I got my first job after graduate school, after my postdoc. I wasn't seeing too many jobs advertised that I was qualified for, but I had heard about this company that I thought was really interesting. They were doing bumblebees and biological control agents in California with copert. And so I just called one of them up one day and just said, hey, I'm going to be in your area. I'm really interested in your company. Could you give me a tour, or could we meet for lunch or something? Just tell me about what you guys do. So I did that, and they kind of gave me the whole tour. And then at the end of that, they said, we do have this opening in our contract research department. Would you be interested in that? I was like, sure. So they invited me back for an interview. And while that job wasn't really what I was looking for, it was a great opportunity. So you have to just be flexible, talk to lots of people, meet people, and yes, ask them if they have any openings coming up, because you won't offend them. They know what it's like to be out there looking for jobs, and so you just have to get yourself out there and meet people.
Awesome. Really good advice from everybody. We are coming up on 2:30, and we didn't get to every question, but Beck, if you want to email me, I just dropped my name in the chat and we can talk more about your question because it was quite loaded and we want to help you get the right course of action. So yeah, other than that, like, thank you so much for being here. I learned a lot about all the different types of jobs, and it was very inspiring to hear from you all. So yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, have a good rest of your week.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.